as you've seen from earlier footage, were in Dennis Wright's at the restoration of a 1954 150cc BSA motorbike. Dennis, maybe you'd introduce me to your colleagues who were instrumental in getting the motorbike to this stage.
Well, Liam was the man to come up with the main idea, looking for a bike, and I had that bit of junk lying against the wall, which has its own story. That came from Benny, collected it out of a ditch some 10 years ago, which seemingly he'll explain how long it lay there, and they decided that it'd be done up, and it was just put to me, if I did the tricking on it, they'd get me the bits, and that's how it was done. Everything was got. I had nothing. I sat back here. All I had to do was ask for stuff. I never was in a position like that in my life before.
But of course, it was put to video, and you spent quite a. We can go through that a little bit later, but it's been all recorded, and so the whole process will be online eventually.
Pádraig and I talked about doing a shot. How many years ago would it be? It must be 4 or 5 years ago. It's another. There's remains of the bike that we intended to do, and of course, it never happened. And when this came up, I said, "Look, this is the job for you." And got him down here, and he pulled the sleeves up and done everything as we wanted it, and as he wanted, which was more than us, and set up the cameras and kept an eye on them. I used to shout when I think I had cameras nearly full, and he'd come down and service them again, away with them, and this is the results of what he came out with.
Now, Benny, of course, saying that there's a piece of sort of metal lying in a hedge almost, it must be a very brave thing or a great vision to see, you know, a bicycle that normally might go to a scrap merchant, that you would have taken it upon yourself to take it out of that condition and then to start the process of restoration.
Yeah, well, I just had it. It was laying in a field up in Cullen in County Louth, and I seen it one day as I was spreading lime round, you know, so I brought it home in the spreader actually, and it lay at our house then for, I don't know, many years, 4 or 5 years. We always had the good intention of restoring it, like, you know, but never got round to it. So Dennis seen it one day, and he said if I had that I could put her going. So I said, well, here you are, take it with you.
And had you passion for motorbikes in particular, or just restoration?
No, well, Dennis and myself raced sidecars way back in the 60s, 64, 60, 62, 64, 65, around that time. We were racing LBSAs that time, sidecar outfits.
So you're familiar with, and you saw the potential of the bike being brought back to its original condition.
Dennis said he was anxious to have a go at it, so I said we'll go ahead and try it and see what'll happen, and that's the result of it now. She's going perfect.
Well, it lay there for maybe 2 years before. Well, if Liam's idea hadn't come up, it'd probably be still lying there. Whereas there's several other projects lying the same.
So Liam, you're the man that are held responsible, or maybe the man with the initiative to get motivating all these people into getting something back to which we've seen earlier, to pristine condition again.
Well, I don't know about being responsible for all of that, but no, a very good friend of mine, Pat Mundy, was retiring from the vocational school in Belturbet, and people had decided that he would like a motorbike, and at one stage it was suggested that a Honda 50 would be acquired, but then word came back from various sources that no, his father used to have one of these BSA Bantams, and that was his lifelong dream to get one of those. So we started looking, put out the feelers, and we found there weren't very many really now. So then the suggestion was made that Dennis said if we'd get the parts, he'd rebuild one. So as it went on, we found another one as well. So we bought that one in the meantime, and carried on then with this one here as well. So here's the fruits of it today. It had a long gestation period, I suppose, but it eventually came through.
There's jobs here going on a lot longer.
Of course, I was contacted. I think it was last February to supply the lighting to make sure that the video was recorded on the good lighting conditions. And Pádraig, you set up a couple of cameras. Maybe you'd run through your experience of working in this environment with multi-camera and the work that was associated with getting the video assembled.
Yeah, well, we set up 3 cameras because we knew Dennis would be flying around the bike at all angles, and we knew his back would be at one camera at some time, so we needed to be able to switch around from one to the other on the finished product. So the kit itself is, there are actually 3 mini Mobius action cameras, and really there was no work for me to do here. We just had to put the cameras, mount your own lights, and when Dennis felt he was going to do some work, he'd hit the switch, all 3 cameras and 2 lights would come on, and when he's finished he'd knock them off, and maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks I'd come down and empty the cameras and bring them back and put them together.
We got the feel that how much these cameras would hold, and I used to have an idea, and I'd give him a ring and I'd say, look, I'd have 3 or 4 hours done, and he'd come down, and then there could be a fortnight nothing had happened and that type of thing.
So from a 1954 maybe low technology motorbike, we can go through the details of that, to the very latest technology with 3 camera and then for inclusion on the web. Which did you embrace the easiest, the new technology or the old technology?
Well, the technology of the cameras, I have known nothing about them yet. That everyone has their own, but some of the technology that went into the bike, I enjoyed that. But the cameras was just a bit of fun to have them around.
Maybe you'd run through some of the history of the BSA with that particular model, the 150cc, and the development of that, seeing it was post-war.
The original bike came from a design of the DKW, which would have been a German bike before the war, and I suppose it was handed over to BSA after the war to manufacture a similar bike. It was the Honda 50 of the 50s, and they sold in thousands. They were basically a good bike. They had their problems, but they were doing a lot of work. And the major thing that we deviated a bit from standard is just in the electronics that's on that one. It's the most modern electronics that you can get, which is magic. That you have all the things that give trouble on the old Bantams. Had the pleasure of throwing them away, and that was lovely.
Now, bikes, people mightn't realise that there are actually quite complex pieces of equipment, even more complex than cars, because while they're 2 wheels and suspension, balance and all those type of things are very important. And maybe, Dennis, you that have raced, maybe you know your experience of working or racing bikes of this type.
Well, we didn't race bikes like these, they were far bigger. They were 650s, 500cc engines we were using. Nowadays they're using 1800cc in some of the sidecar outfits, you know. But we were only using ordinary 500 BSAs. They were still BSAs, still made by the same firm, but they were all a lot more modern and a lot stronger than that one there, like, you know.
So this was more nearly a domestic bike in a sense rather than a racing bike?
Oh yeah, this was a go-to-work job, these 125s and that 175s. It's the first motorbike I ever had on the road was a 175, a slightly bigger version of that there in the early 60s. It was my first 2-stroke bike that I ever had, like, you know. And it was just unfortunate that it got blew up. There was a bomb put on it one time and left down across the border, and the whole bike was blew up into pieces, so it was.
You know, in any restoration, while some parts can be integral to the thing, others over time can rust. How did you source material to bring it back to the condition?
Liam, we went up to Donegal one day and we got boxes of far more than we expected to get, and that was a blessing. Like, I mean, we got tremendous value out of that. And then we got a donor. We couldn't say we got an engine, but we got an engine in piece, a block of an engine that was restorable. The original engine, the crankcases were too badly corroded. they wouldn't seal, so there was no point in trying to do that. But everything inside the engine was rebuilt. We just used the casings and nuts and bolts and pieces like that till we built up our bike. There was all new bearings got, seals. That's every bearing, that's even in the gearbox bearings, the whole lot. All them was replaced. The barrel piston was replaced, and then the ignition system, which was the daddy of the whole lot.
Of course, as you said earlier, some of the modern motorbikes up to even up to 2 litre possibly, they've all electronic ignition, maybe an outline, is it a carburetor, or what style of carburetor, or what type of fuel intake was involved? See, it's a single cylinder, so there must have been a good deal associated with getting power into that engine.
Not a serious problem. The carburetor is bog standard. All it had to be done to that is just a good clean output. Make sure that I'd say there's probably 2 carburetors in the one, but still it's all the one parts. It's only a matter of just having parts moving, like slides and stuff, in good condition. But they're not fussy on that. You know, they wouldn't be as fussy as a fuel injected engine. That a little deviation of 1% of fuel wouldn't knock them about a lot. So that wouldn't be the biggest problem. And the biggest problem with them, as I said before, is the ignition. If the ignition is good, they'll nearly burn turf.
And suspension is very important, because you rely on that for stability on the road. How much work had you involved in getting the suspension of the bike correct?
Well, the suspension will be very crude in that. There's no damping. That would leave them simple. But everything was... If anything was worn, it was replaced. And, you know, the suspension on that is as good as the day it left the factory. But as for modern bikes, like if any man was brave enough to do 100 mile an hour on that, he mightn't be about the next day.
Now, I gather from that you travel different parts of the country to secure things. So the journeys to and from the places to secure parts, it must have been, was it all motorbike talk, or you obviously had some fun in that process as well?
Well, now early on in the process, I was informed by Dennis that I was outside my comfort zone dealing with motorbikes, and I'll freely admit I know nothing about them. A little bit of knowledge about cars and classic cars, but not so good on the bikes, no. And so therefore, but the vast majority of the collection of parts and things like that was done via the internet. Wonderful! It's wonderful now the way, you know, that you can just get parts and order them up and have them delivered, and it makes it an awful lot simpler, you know. A few years ago you'd have been looking at keeping addresses, and like was mentioned earlier, Bantam John and people like this, that they were the sources, and you rang them or contacted them. But nowadays there's various ones in eBay, and everything else is all marketing, and you can get parts and things like that. So that part of it made it quite simple, really. It would have been more difficult some years ago before the internet, I must really admit now, and there would have been more travelling involved in that.
Now, Pádraig, you're recording it to go on the web, and now with social media, everything is almost instant. When you started here, there was a prospect. It could be 6 months, it could be 9 months, it could have been a year. So, like, what was your vision of is this going to happen? You know, how am I going to get all this? You had cameras to unload, like in the instant media type of thing. What was your view on something that might have taken that period of time?
I decided not to think too much about it and let it happen. Basically, we really didn't know how long it would go on for, I suppose. I mean, other bits of kit would come into the shed, and you know, so I was just working off Dennis's command. So what can I say?
Organizer.
Yeah, so we just worked around Dennis, really. I mean, the cameras could have stayed here 2 years. It wouldn't have mattered. At the end of the day, I mean, they have been here 7 months, and we've put it in a time-lapse video and brought it down to just a little over 11 minutes. And as we agreed, anything longer wouldn't have worked anyway. So I think we're happy enough with the outcome.
Very much so.
So now you have a very, as shown on the video, you have a very successful restoration, and I presume you have taken it on the road.
Well, you've seen the total test drive. It has been up and down to the cross twice, which is a total journey, I suppose, for about a mile and a half. But it goes simple. It's easy started. It's not rattling. I often took ones with less trials off to work the next morning.
So where you have situations where people say, "Oh, you know what we should do? We should do up a motorbike." You have now were able to say to people, "I have done up a motorbike and I have restored to original condition." So is the team very happy with what has happened?
Oh yeah, I think he's made a good job of it. There's no doubt about that. You know, the paintwork, everything is very well done, and he built the wheels himself, which was some job, I can tell you. I wouldn't like to take on a wheel now to build it. So Dennis done it himself. He says he wasn't long at it, but I don't know about that.
And did they put you under any pressure? Was there any sort of phone calls, or you used your own time and to get that sorted?
Well, anyone that had known me, they'd only be wasting their time. You know, that wouldn't be. No, it was. There's no doubt about it, and it should be said. I never worked with as an agreeable a crowd around me that put. It was, every inch of it was enjoyable. I said that I never cursed, which was very unlike me, and I never cut my fingers on the whole job, and that never happened in my life before.
So could this have sparked off a new restoration relationship? I see a lot more rusted metal in the garage now. Is there a team together now to develop maybe this, to work on other projects?
Well, I was told there to get that one out of here quickly, that there was another patient waiting for the bed, and it's a bit like the HSE, you know. There's another one coming in, and so it's going on. Yes.
He's looking for trolleys.
No, we have. Well, I have done bikes before and bits of cars and stuff. I wouldn't say I ever did anything to the standard of that, but I've done bits of them as to that standard. And like building wheels and stuff, I'd done that before. And I have a number of projects to be done. I have another one, a 150, which would be the bicycle that came out after that. I've it to do. It's not as big a job, but there's parts of it there. I hope to have it out for Christmas. But we're not worrying about that, not making a fuss about that. It's just going.
So that's it. That's our team, our restoration team, and thanks to all for inviting me down to take a look at the finished product, and hopefully we'll move on to the next project.